So today we're going over Community Collecting 101. We'll get started. Yeah. So Greg, if you'll kind of introduce yourself to us briefly.
Hi, my name is Greg Kessler. I'm a historian and writer from St. Louis. I'm also a teacher. My specialty is music history, music economics, really. But as part of my thesis, I created the Archive of St. Louis Punk. It's an online database and repository for music history that otherwise people wouldn't be able to find.
Cool. And I'm Emma Prince. Backlog is my little company. I founded it in 2021, which is almost 2 years now, after I was laid off during the pandemic. I'm a certified archivist, and before I founded Backlog, I was a university archivist for 5 years, and then I also worked in genealogy reference. So what is a community archive? A community archive is defined as a collection of material gathered primarily by members of a community and over whose community members exercise some level of control. So a community collection is a group of people comes together and, forms, an archive or documentation of themselves. So it's usually not coming from the outside in, it's usually one group coming together and deciding to document themselves. And so how can we kind of aid in community archives? So let's say you're a historical society and you've got a blind spot, or if you're a museum and you'd like to better document a certain group or neighborhood. So community archives are created or accumulated, described, or preserved by individuals and community groups who desire to document their cultural heritage based on shared experiences, interests, or identities. So we'll kind of talk about today how professional archivists, curators, and organizers, and even just, if you work at your local historical society or if you're a volunteer, how we can engage with communities to support and then start these community collections. And like I just said, a good, example of a community college is, an ethnic, racial, or a religious group that's under-identified or underrepresented in your collection. Community collections can pertain to neighborhoods or events. So let's say something, like 50 years ago, there was an inauguration of something and you'd like to learn more about it. Well, how do we go 50 years in the past to collect that? We can't, but we can reach out to the community to learn more about said event and document it. And then also community collections can pertain to movements. And one movement that we're going to talk about today is punk rock. Like that's a good example. And so is Greg, and Greg is here to talk about how he started the St. Louis Punk Archive. So we're kind of use the St. Louis Punk Archive of an example of how to start a community collection. And so if you're going to start a community, archive, like where do we even start? Like I'd like to document this neighborhood or event that we don't have anything on in our collection. What you can first do is maybe brainstorm ideal finds. Like if it was an event, oh my goodness, I would like 3 tickets to this event, and how do you find, like the ticket, or how do I find a flyer for the event? Or, like the notes from someone who organized this event. So kind of brainstorm what it ideally might look like, this collection that you'd like to start and collect. And then also sometimes it's easier to just say, to identify what you don't want. If you already have a couple of tickets, maybe you don't need 10 more ticket stubs. Maybe you don't have a lot of physical space, so you're not going to take that many objects, but you're happy to take papers and scans of things. It's a lot easier to kind of start when you've defined the scope of your collection. And sometimes that's just, due to necessity and space. So we'll start with Greg now. And if Greg can tell us a bit about his St. Louis Punk Archive and how it started.
Okay. Initially, the basis of the archive is my own hoarding tendencies. I played in a band in the 1980s, and really when I was in high school, I started tearing flyers off of telephone poles and grabbing newspapers, or pretty much anything else I could do. But when I was in grad school, I got permission to write my master's thesis on punk rock, using St. Louis as sort of an example. And what I discovered when I sat down to do research, because I had been a history student for a long time, was what I needed didn't exist. If you sit down to study jazz, or you sit down to study country music or something, there's miles and miles of information that you can use. What I discovered very quickly, and I should have known, but it was the first time I thought about it, was most people stay involved in the scene for 2, 3, 4, 5 years. They collect all this stuff, and when they're done, they put it in a box and they shove it to the back of their closet, and it's never seen again. And as I started to do research for my paper, it occurred to me that the only way to really study something is to be able to look at a timeline. So to look at it, I needed to be able to study 30 years, 40 years of music history. The same way you would do with jazz or rock and roll or klezmer music or anything else. You look at the history of it. And I really couldn't. I had quite a long list of things, but punk in St. Louis begins around 1976. And this was in the 2000s when I started working on my paper. So I needed these things that I needed to be able to look at 30 or 40 years of information. So I had to figure out a way to get it. And at the same time, I had a class that was sort of a public history class where they were showing us how to use Omeka and put things online. So things kind of started at the same time. And what I did was I took what was my giant hoard and I scanned it all up, and I learned how to use Omeka, and I put it up. And originally what I put up wasn't even on Omeka. What I did was I put it up, I put flyers and things up on MySpace. And it went up on MySpace really just because I'm a teacher and I wanted to see what kids were doing. And this was, I don't know, 2003, 2004. And I wanted to see what they were doing. And all of a sudden, when I put them up, bands that I knew and people that I knew, they were really excited. They had thrown all their stuff away. So they said, oh, can I put this on mine? So I realized that people wanted to see these things. So it was a lot of things sort of crashing together at the same time. And when I started to look at what I had and what I needed, I was thinking about what to do. And like I said, I'd been involved in the scene, so I was relatively well known. We weren't the greatest band in the world, but we knew people. So I started to think of people I knew who I thought had saved a lot of things. So I put my stuff up so you could see it, and I didn't really tell anybody I was doing it. And then I called 4 or 5 people who came from different areas. So I called a friend of mine who was from Illinois, had a lot to do with the Edwardsville and Belleville scene. Then I called another friend of mine who, her and one of her friends booked shows in St. Louis in the 1980s. Then I called a guy that I'd played in a band with who had been around for a really long time and had stuff. And I said, can I borrow your stuff? And I said, I'm not going to keep it. I don't want you to give it to me. I just want you to let me borrow it. When I give it back, I'll give you everything back plus digital copies. And a lot of people had gotten rid of their cassette players. A lot of people got rid of their turntables. So they hadn't even heard their own music in a long time. So these people I asked all said yes. And so I drove out and I picked stuff up, brought it back to my house, and I had a scanner, and I bought a thing to duplicate cassettes, or to digitize cassettes, and a turntable to digitize records. And I sat down and I did it. And I ended up with, a few hundred things plus a bunch of flyers, and we put them up in a couple places. And when I finally thought I had a real collection, I presented it to everybody that didn't know about it. I put some up on Facebook and I said, hey, look what I have, go look at this. And as I did that, it gave me some credibility to go ask other people if I could borrow their stuff. And for the first several years, it was just that. Can I borrow your junk? And Emma mentioned local historical societies. I really felt like I became somebody who went around a neighborhood and asked if I could climb through your attic and look at your stuff, because they just started bothering everybody about it. And the nice thing was, I'd been around a long time. I started going to shows in 1985. So, I was able to ask, and the people I asked were people that I knew were important people in the scene. So once people saw that I borrowed their stuff, then it made it okay for them to lend me their things. So for the first few years, it was just that. And I had never heard the term, but Emma told me the term is catch and release. I started borrowing things from people and I would scan it and duplicate it and everything. And then I would put it up online and I would give their stuff back to them and then tell them, you've got all the stuff, you can put it on your page, you can put it on your Facebook or anything else. And it became popular quick. It's not, St. Louis isn't the biggest scene in the world. But we are a tight-knit group and it has been around for a long time. So it started to build momentum and people started posting on the Facebook page and saying, I have this. And then it became easier to say, I'm looking for something. Can you let me borrow this? Or one of my pleas all the time was, please, please, please do not throw things away. I don't care what it is. I don't care how small it is, save it and ask, because I do talk to people often who say, and I'll ask them, do you have this stuff? They say, oh, you know what? I had that a year ago. I threw it all away. And I'm not talking about papers. I'm talking about stacks of records and things like that that have gone into the trash. So I started asking everybody, just don't throw anything away. If you have something and you can't do something with it, just tell me and I will drive to your house with my truck and pick it up and you never have to deal with it again. It's just like calling those hoarder shows. So I started doing that and I would go. And people still, they would kind of change their mind and they kind of want it back after they saw it was organized. But a few years into it, I got a phone call, or I guess I got a message from someone I had known not real well, saying that she had a leather jacket of a former member of the scene who had passed away. And she had been trying to get a bar or something to take this jacket and people wouldn't. And I had said before, if no one will take care of it, give it to me and I will take care of it. And the promise I make to everybody is, one day this will all end up in a museum. It'll end up in an archive someplace when I'm 80 years old and I'm no longer doing it. And it'll be preserved. And after a long time, she said, drive out to Jeffco and pick this up. And I picked up a leather jacket, which is hanging on the other side of the basement where I work. And that was the first physical piece that I received from someone. And then about a year later, I got an email out of nowhere from someone who said, I am blah, 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 and I live on a boat and I have a bunch of stuff that, I used to take pictures. Do you want it? And I said, absolutely. And about a year later, I got a 30-pound box full of just everything you can possibly imagine. And I've gotten 2 more from her since then. And then now people call and they say, I don't know what to do with this stuff. My kids have no interest in my old band shirts. Do you want them? And it's been, people have donated things. In fact, the picture that's up on the screen right now, this calendar from 1980, this is a hugely important piece to the people who were around at that time. The people who were around in 1980 are sort of the second wave of punk in St. Louis. There was an earlier wave. But this you can see just down at the bottom, it says Brown and Langer. Brown and Langer were one of the really big bands in St. Louis. They were one of the first punk bands to start playing in places other than clubs. It was Brown and Langer that, went out and started booking VFWs and bowling alleys and everything. And this calendar, every one of the people that were involved at that time had this. And when I finally got a copy of it and was able to put it up, everybody got super excited and, pointing out, because there's pictures of scene people and pictures of bands, and it talks about shows and interviews people. And it was just this, and this is a little before my time. But when I got it, it just brought this rush to everybody involved. It was great that Emma picked this picture because it was such an important piece. And it also kind of shows, which I just noticed, how low tech I was working at the time. If you look at the middle of the picture, there's a fold, and that's because I had an old scanner that would only scan 8.5 by 11. I had to scan it twice and stitch it together in Photoshop. And that's why you have that seam until I got a big scanner. And so it really was, and Emma mentioned, decide what you don't want. I never went through that. If you want to give it to me, give it to me. I will take it. I will take care of it, love it, hold on to it for the rest of my life, and you don't have to worry about it. I have, like I said before, a hoarding tendency. So I don't turn things down, but I understand from having worked with the Historical Society in Edwardsville, because I'm from Illinois, is, you know, you have to set some boundaries as to what you want and have to set some guidelines. So that was kind of how it worked. And the social media part of it was just sort of for fun. It wasn't even something I'd originally intended, but we have a Facebook page and an Instagram page, and it's not something I do constantly. I get real excited and put 20 things up in a week, and then I don't have time again. So I should do better at that. But everybody gets excited. People from out of town, people from overseas, they see it. And that's one of the things that I felt when I did this, once I really got started with it, because there was sort of a difference between the historian in me and the archivist in me, was I put up anything people gave me with very few exceptions. And it was so, if there was, you know, a kid in Hong Kong who wanted to know what punk rock in the Midwest was like in the 80s and 90s, they could go to my site and they could look at everything. They could listen to the records, they could listen to the tapes, they could read the zines, they could see the flyers, they could, you know, they could read the interviews. And I did very little curation because I wanted people to be able to sit down and take it all in for themselves and decide what is important and what is not. So that's kind of where this all came from, and it continues. I'm sitting at my table right now, surrounded by hundreds of things that need to be scanned and digitized. I'll never ever get through it, but it's all here, and it'll all get taken care of, and it has become more and more important to the scene itself than I think anybody thought it would. I think started out, people were, why would you do this? And what's the point? But it has become a really important part of, you know, people's lives, and they get to see these things and relive the things that they did or the shows they went to. And I, like I said, I try and do it without a lot of curation. So I'm not leaving people out of it. There's very little of that. And I think it has allowed more people to be part of it.
So this just kind of sums up what you just said a little bit.
Yeah, and when I very first started, I did have a hard time doing audio because I didn't know what I was doing. So I had to learn that, and I have learned to do video. I have stacks of Super 8 film that I can't figure out what to do with. They're going to have to be sent off, and I learned to use reel-to-reel tape and do that. The bottom picture, I meant to tell you this the other day, this bottom picture is an example of something that somebody lent me and I gave back to them. This was a band called Bent, who one of the guys in the band was one of the very first people I asked. His name's Rob Wagner, and he was in a band called Ultraman, and he played in a band with me. And this was a book that at their very last show, one of their big fans had kept everything that they had ever done, all of their flyers, their ticket stubs. He had written them letters and everything, and he had put it in a big scrapbook. And at the very last show, he walked up to the stage and handed it to Rob. And then Rob let me borrow it, and I was able to photocopy it. And it is something you don't see very often. Usually, you know, if you think of somebody making a scrapbook, it's, you know, Donnie and Marie or the Bay City Rollers. But this is a local band that somebody made a scrapbook for and gave it to them when they were done to show them how much they loved them. And when I put it up online just maybe a month and a half ago, people just went crazy for it because there was so much in there that they hadn't seen. And the guys that were in the band had not seen it in 15, 20 years. And it started a whole new buzz about it. So, and people within the community have taken, I wouldn't say ownership of the archive because it's, you know, isn't owned by the community, but they have taken, I'm not sure how to say it. They've become emotionally invested in it. And, oh, you know what? You need to get this, or, oh, wait a minute, I know this guy that has these things. Or, you know, I will ask, does somebody have this? I'm looking for, right now I'm looking for the menu sign from a bar called Bernard's Pub, and maybe have found it in Chicago. And people are like, oh, I think I know this guy, and I think you can get a hold of him. And the community through social media has really sort of taken on the mantle of trying to expand it. And people are very nice to me about it. People could be very nasty if they wanted to about, why are you putting my stuff up? And why is this, you know, you're going to steal my stuff. And I've never had that. People are so thankful to have it up. And and so interested in being a part of it. So I've run through so much of your slides on accident, and I warned Emma before that I no one wants to talk to me about this. Everyone's sick of it, but I really enjoy going through it. So I'm sorry I ran through all of her slides before she had a chance to click on them. This is another great piece that's in there, and I was telling Emma the other day, this is the very first punk zine in St. Louis. It's called Noise, and one of the people involved in it, I think the publisher, I'm going to get yelled at for getting it wrong. That is one thing, is if I get something wrong, I hear about it immediately, which is great. I tell everybody, if I'm wrong, tell me, because I don't want to be wrong. The guy that did this was actually a foreign exchange student in England during the early years of punk in 76 and 77, and was there for the Sex Pistols and the Clash and the Buzzcocks and all that stuff. And when he came back to St. Louis, he started this. And the people who wrote for this became the basis of the St. Louis scene that's still around today. And they're the people who started the next generation of magazines. And this was great. I got this real early on from a guy named Don Hollenbeck, who had written for it. And he scanned it, and I was able to put it up. And this was, I think at the time, this was the oldest piece I had on the site. And I had never seen it before, because in 1978, I was 11. So this was before me, and it was great that I got to see this. And we eventually, over the years, got, and I say we all the time, but it's me, have a full run of it. And it gives a snapshot of this time period that would be impossible otherwise. If I had scanned, a story from it, it wouldn't have made any difference. You have to be able to look at this full text so you can get an idea. And then you have to be able to look at the issues that came after it and before it to see what people are talking about. And now I do have physical copies of this, because they were donated over the years. So I have physical copies, but I had gotten scans of it, or was people let me borrow. I got a big box from Chicago and had to send it back when I was done, but it was this huge amount of stuff that I wouldn't have had otherwise. And I felt really grateful that people were trusting me, and really grateful that I hadn't done anything to spoil my reputation when I was 18. That now that I'm 55, people trust me enough to hand me their stuff and not worry about it. So things had to evolve and things had to change. So it is still, the general presence is online, but there is a physical aspect to it now. But the digital part of it is what everyone sees and everyone participates in.
So kind of what Greg just mentioned, the catch and release. So if you're trying to get items from the community, but the donor would like to keep the original, you can just scan them and keep the digital copy. You do want to make sure that you get a deed of gift signed with that digital copy, especially so the owner doesn't see it online someday and was like, oh, I thought that was just for you, or just for people who could physically access it. One thing that I've seen this work out, how I've seen this work with historical societies, is you do kind of a scanning day and you open it up to the public, and you can also do that through your community at the local library. And also this gives you the chance to collect information about each piece. So as you scan it, you want to ask, the person, like, when was this photo taken? Who's in the photo? You want to make sure that you're just not, scanning and saving it, that you're also collecting that metadata around it. This is a photo of a scanner that I have. It's a Caesar scanner, and it's, allows, it's a book scanner in here where we are scanning a scrapbook. And even though that museum retained the scrapbook, it's still kind of fun to have the equipment and, be able to let other people use it. So if you've got a scanner, you can kind of get started with this, especially if it's portable. One thing I mentioned that you do need to have donors filled out deeds of gifts, and that, you can just there's several online. We can also give you a form one. And in the deed of gift, you also need to talk about access. Is this going to, possibly go on the internet? Is it just going to be, in your shared drive, in your saved drive for a while. And it's just so people don't see things online and they get spooked by it. And usually that's pretty clear and people are very used to sharing now with the age of Facebook, but it's nice that that is spelled out. And then also in the deed of gift, this is just another bullet point to cover, is that you have permission to reproduce it. So even though they're keeping the physical item, they're giving you some leeway with the copyright.
You want me to go? I'm sorry.
Yeah, if you'll just talk a little bit about, the kind of the releases that you read at the oral histories.
Okay. One of the things I started doing, because I'm working on a book, but I wanted to collect it anyway, so I started doing oral histories. And when we do an oral history, the very first thing we do is we sit down down here right behind where I am. And I have a statement for them to read, which basically says, "Hi, my name is Greg Kessler. I give my permission for this recording to be made for the Archive of St. Louis Punk." And this is what Emma was talking about, what permissions you get. The oral histories that I have, everyone understands, and it says that I'm going to use this to write a book. But the oral histories themselves don't become part of the public archive. I try to get people to be as honest as possible and talk and be free to talk. And so the permissions they give me are the permissions to quote them, but not post it. So there is a difference. When I ask people, can I post this recording by your band? That's completely different. When I take those, it's part of the agreement that, I'm going to put these things up. But the oral histories are different, simply because I want people to be honest when they're talking to me, and they know it's part of the permanent collection, but not part of the public collection. And I make the guarantee that if I decide to put up, a 2-minute clip of it, it's something that they can say yes or no to. So that's one of the things that they have, that when we do the oral histories, they agree to, and they read it at the beginning of the video. So there's no confusion.
I muted myself because it's getting kind of loud in my office area.
Okay.
So you kind of want to decide, like, where will the collection live? What Greg kind of talked about was, like how it, has taken over his basement. And so it's kind of, where will it live? Will it be digital? Will it be physical? And if you're doing a lot of scan and release or catch and release, now is a good time to maybe start, like putting it onto, a digital archive platform, because it's kind of a good, clean, collection to start with. You don't have to go back and scan things. You can start this initiative when you get going.
So I had a public history class. I think it was my second semester of grad school. One of the professors that was doing it was one of the people on my thesis committee. And he showed us Omeka, and he had the grad students, he said, put up 6 things, and showed us how to use it and showed us how to make banners and these things. And I saw really quickly, because I wasn't sure what I was going to do with all this stuff I was collecting, that not only was this a great way to allow people to see it, but it was also, and I look at it this way, this is some security to my collection. I live in fear of crashing computers and anything else. When I put something on Omeka, it's there, and it's going to be there forever. And if I need to go back and look and see who donated something, or if I've lost files, those files are there, and I can go back and find them, and anybody else can go find them. It's a nice basic interface that works really well, and is easy to search, and people can spend hours and hours going down the rabbit hole. But it's also a nice place to have your collection, so it's organized for you to use as well. It's nice that I can sit down if I need something and need something quick. I can sit down on my own Omeka site, not even as a manager, but just as a user, and type something in, and I can get a date, or I can get a name, or I can read part of a zine or something. And it gives me that information real quick. So I don't just have it to let other people use it, but I actually use my own as a research tool, because it's easy to use. And the reason things are up there is because they're all in one place, and I don't have to go dig through the boxes on the shelf behind me. I can go on to Omeka and I can find it itself, and it's easy to manipulate and it's easy to customize. So I think I've gone way beyond what my professor thought we were going to do after our 6-week class or whatever. But it's he's a public historian, and he is one of those people that crawl through your attic looking for your scrapbooks, and this is the kind of stuff that he does. It really turned out to be perfect for what I was doing, and I had no idea what it was before I sat down in that class.
And then we just got a screenshot of Greg's Omeka here.
And it's not fancy. What I put up wasn't fancy. I have, you can browse items. Collections is every time somebody donates something, I make them a collection. So somebody can go in, say Dave Thomas, who's the guy from Chicago that gave me a bunch of, that lent me things. He can go in, click Dave Thomas collection. He can see everything that he let me borrow. Dwan Dunn is the woman that gave me the 30 pounds. She can go in and click on it and see what she donated. I haven't done exhibits yet. I explained what the personal collections are, and the last thing is the flyer project is another site, just because there are 900 flyers and it didn't help to have them on here. But the front page has the last few things I added, and then it just randomly brings up something, and every time you load it, it brings up something new. So this one brought up Technological March of Death, which was a metal zine from the 1980s. And really, this was something somebody lent me, and I had to scan them kind of quick and give them back. And it's amazing because I think it's 5 issues, and I'm sure there are only 4 or 5 left. And then you can see sort of down at the bottom, it says Uncle Tupelo promotional pictures with someone sent anonymously. So it's really simple, and I think it shows the first like 4 things, and then you can look at everything that's on there. It's really easy to manipulate. There's nothing on it that takes a whole lot of to go in and be a user on it. It's really nice for your patrons to be able to use.
And I know you kind of already discussed this at the beginning about how you started to reach out to people, especially like utilizing MySpace.
Yeah, that was, like I said, that was the very first thing I did. And it was really only because I was trying to see what the kids were doing, because I was teaching high school at the time. So I thought, oh, well, I'll do this. And then I realized that not everybody had saved everything they'd ever touched like I did. So people started asking for it. So I started putting more up, and then I saw this Omeka class, and one of the things that started rolling, which was also an accident, was the kids were using Facebook, and I said, what is this? And as I signed up for it, there was a button that says, do you want to invite everyone you know? And I didn't know what that was, so I clicked it. And within, a couple of seconds, 200 emails had gone out to people. And so everybody was like, well, I wonder what this is. So we all signed up for it, and it slowly started to grow. And the picture on here to the left is a large portion of the archive. And there are things here that people donated. The pictures up top were from Dwan Dunn, who was a photographer. The leather jacket on the right belonged to Robin Coslin. That was the very first thing I received. You can see the Lou Reed poster that was donated by a guy named Robert Kuhlman, who lived in California, had stuff at his mom's house, and called and asked me if I wanted to come get it. And I think I went over to the house, and that was another thing. I said, well, do you want that too? And I said, yes, give me that too. And I walked out of the house with a giant bag of stuff. On the right hand or the left hand side, that it's an army jacket with buttons all over it that actually belonged to one of my best friends from high school who passed away, and it's filled with his buttons that we used to wear when we went to punk rock shows or to Animal House, which was an under 21 place. So it's, it has become a physical place, but it still lives online. One of the things that Emma has on here that I will say is, and I haven't had to do a ton of this, is making sure that you have a moderator to take care of whatever social media you use. I've been very, very lucky that the people who use mine don't go online and scream and yell at each other and post inappropriate things. I've had to do very, very little moderation. as much as people think about, punk rock as being these slobbering, screaming, running around, breaking things, people, we are, I think, as a whole, a very respectful group of people, and people respect what I've done and what everyone is trying to do. But it is really important because I have seen other sites go completely off the rails. And one of the most important things is to retain the credibility of the collection you're trying to build, so people don't begin to think of it in a bad light. And that's one of the things I said before, people have taken sort of some ownership of it emotionally, but I'm very protective of the collection, that it remain, I'm not even sure what the word is. I want people to respect what's been done. I want them to treat it with respect. And I want, when people look at it, to take it seriously. And it's not just, I'm sitting in my basement, but not taking as something I've done casually. And people have respected that. But I've seen other sites where they didn't so much. But being online has really helped bring people to it. And when it brings people to it, it brings their stuff to it too, which sounds crass, but that is kind of the idea. So, and it does fill my basement. This was one of the greatest nights of my entire life. The Welders were part of that first wave of punk rock in the mid 1970s. They were maybe the only all-girl teenage punk band at that time that wrote their own. That was my dog. Sorry. Wrote their own songs and managed themselves. And even if you go back to a band like the Runaways, they were helped put together by someone else. The Welders were just a bunch of teenage girls who got together and decided that they were going to start a band. And they were around for about 5 years. They played about 20 shows. And they were playing at a time where it was hard for anybody to get a show, but they were playing with bands that were 5, 10 years older than them. And they held their own against them. They wrote some great songs, and they were in your face about who they were and what they were doing. And then this past summer, they were invited to the St. Louis Sound exhibit at the Missouri Historical Society to do a panel and talk about, they've re-released their record and stuff. And I got invited to moderate. And it was absolutely amazing being on stage with them and talking to them. And in fact, the Welders were my very first oral history. They just happened to all be in town at the same time a few summers ago, and came to the house and sat down. And they're incredibly important, way more important. When I was in high school or when I was getting started, I had no idea who they were. And that's one of the problems with punk, is it is very, very periodized. And even though they had been really important 5 years earlier, people had forgotten about it. And it was so great to see them get the recognition that they should have gotten in 1976, 1977. So this was such an incredibly fun night.
So in conclusion, to kind of how you can do community archives and work with your community is to define the scope of what you're collecting, kind of look for those, brainstorm, what you'd really like and what you wouldn't like. Don't forget to get a deed of gift from each donor, so you actually have some intellectual control over your collection. And utilizing a digital archive makes the collection more accessible. And just to be clear, Omeka is a digital archive platform. We talk about it a lot, like as a tool, and just call it Omeka, but it's something that can really help put it's not just like a digital photo album, it also keeps the metadata next to the item. And so it's one of the leading archive platforms. And then use social media for community outreach. You can put a flyer at the library, but everybody's on Facebook now, especially if we're trying to reach back 30 years. So it's what. So one thing that Backlog does do is archival assessments, and we just kind of meet via Zoom or in person and talk about, hey, we're having problems with this, or we found this item in the collection and we don't know how to accession it, or hey, we've got this spot of mold. And we just can kind of talk through those things with you if you've got any kind of problems. And I promise it won't be too spammy. We just kind of want to learn more about your collection and its needs. And then another couple of webinars that we have coming up later this month, we're doing a genealogy webinar on Abe's papers. So it's basically how to conduct genealogical research using some of the record sets in the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library in Springfield. You know, anybody and everybody who lived in New Salem at the time he was there wrote their history of how they knew Abraham Lincoln, and all of those manuscripts are in the library. And it's kind of cool because if your ancestor happened to live in Springfield or New Salem at the time that Abraham Lincoln did, they may have been documented in this record set. So it's kind of like how to, you know, look at the periphery of Lincoln when in his early days, and how, you know, if you have Central Illinois family, how they might be hidden in those record sets. And that's with one of our genealogists, Jennifer Rigsby. So that'll be kind of interesting. We haven't done a lot of genealogy, so I'm looking forward to that. And then in March, Greg's going to join me again, and we're going to talk about what I've kind of deemed our digital archive solution. And we have a couple of different platforms that we can help you set up and maintain. And I always call it a solution because there's not, you know, one size fits all for archives and digital archives. Like Omeka worked for Greg, but that might not work for your institution. And so that's why we've been calling it the digital archive solution. And we talk about, you know, we've got all this paper stuff. How do we digitize it and get it into that, you know, that digital archive? So that's a Monday, March 6th. If you go to backlog-archivist.com/webinars, you have to sign up for it the way you sign up for this one. It's pretty simple. And then does anybody have questions for Greg? Let's take a look.
Yeah, I have a question for Greg.
Yeah.
Okay, so when doing the catch and release model, is there any downside to keeping that 100% digital? So, you know, like for convenience or something like that, you know, that way someone doesn't have to ship you a box or anything, or is it best to always get the physical items if possible?
I've always asked people to send me things simply because when I scan things, I scan them in at like 500 DPI, make sure that they're really big so they can be reproduced. And then when I put them online, I change it in Photoshop so it's a smaller picture, just to conserve space. But I've always asked people to let me borrow things so I can make sure that they're converted correctly. I can only, one of the hardest things to collect are band t-shirts for local bands, because people wear them all the time. They paint their house in them, they get trashed and get thrown away. So they're really hard to find. And only once, since I started doing this, there was a band called Laugh Stock, and I asked around. There was one t-shirt left, and the guy's name's John Katsafanis. He was the sound guy at Cicero's, and I said, we really want to photograph it. And he insisted that I come to Cicero's. He laid it out on the stage, made me take a picture of it, and then he folded it back up and put it back in the bag and took it out to his car. He's now 10 years later said he thinks he's ready to give it to me, but that was it. He was that protective of that shirt because it's I'm sure the only one left. So other than that, which I had to drive out with my camera and go to the club before it opened. Other than that, I've asked people to send me things simply because I want to make sure that it's the size and everything that I need and things aren't cut off. And I haven't had an issue with that yet. So I have shipped stuff back and forth to California and back and forth to Chicago and other places. So, you know, I'm sure that if you're getting a large amount of stuff and the people who are doing it know what they're doing, then I'm sure that's fine. It may just be a control thing for me. It's better for me to have it and be able to do it exactly the way I want.
And so the catch and release is also, you know, if they like exactly what Greg just said, if they won't give you the physical, you know, we could at least do a digital representation of it. Yeah. I think
I think that, oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, somebody really liked your logo.
Oh, and I got the idea for it, but someone else had to make it because I have no ability at all. And I still have the original bad one that I sent to my friend Matt to make that. One of the nice things about the collection that I built was, I was so much a part of the community to begin with that, and I had a good enough reputation that people did loan me those things. I can imagine in a larger community, in a city, or a neighborhood that's changed, it would likely be harder to get people to come over and hand you their things. Although it's never easy when someone, even when someone lets me borrow things. I always say, I don't want to hurt your adolescence. I don't want your teenage memories to go away. So, but I'm sure it's always hard to hand that over. I've been very lucky, and the people have been okay and trusted me.
I think that's all we have for right now. And Greg, thank you so much for doing this and kind of walking us through the evolution of your punk archive.
Thank you. I can talk about it forever if you want. So thank you very much.
So if anybody has any questions, I've got my email on the screen. Oh, hang on. We've got a question in the chat. Greg, have you received any or many donations from the last decade or two? I found that there's not much enthusiasm from folks to donate or share things that they feel recent.
Yes, our 2000s collection, I say our all the time, like there's someone else down here with me. But I tell people all the time, it's important, give me the stuff that's new, because in 20 years, it's going to be old stuff. So I ask for anything. And just recently, a club called the Way Out Club went out of business, and I went 2 days to the estate sale and bought big stacks of flyers and things. And they are from the 2000s, a lot of them are from 2000s, a lot of them from 2010s. And and I brought them home and took pictures of them, and people got really excited to see that stuff. I think when I very first started, there was less interest in it. But even the people who just played 10 years ago are excited to see their stuff. And I've told everybody, I have no recent limit on what I want, because it's all history at some point. Sometimes it's harder for people to give up newer stuff because it's more part of the recent past. But in terms of, like we talked before about scope, if a show happened yesterday, give me the flyer. If your record came out yesterday, give me a copy of it, because in 50 years or 25 years, when I'm done and I hand it over to a museum or a library, it's going to be 25 years old, and it'll be important to have that. And I think, going back to the very first thing I said, I don't think you can study music unless you look at 30, 40, 50 years of it. You wouldn't study jazz and look at just a 5-year period in 1970. I think to study this, it's important to look at the span, and to be able to study what's happening now, you have to get that stuff.
And to answer that from like a more general point of view, I think that we feel secure that our iPhone photos are being backed up to the iCloud, wherever that is. And so people don't see, they don't save it the way they might, like a scrapbook from 20 years ago. My example to that is, I have no idea where the photos are from my first iPhone, and that was less than 10 years ago. I must have saved it and put it on a hard drive somewhere, or maybe I didn't. And so I think we also have to remember that, just because some of it's on Facebook, if you delete your profile, things are gone. I know a lot of, I work with some high schools, and they're like, oh, we don't do as many photographs for yearbook or whatever because they're all on Facebook. It's like, yeah, but we're expecting those, your high schoolers to not, turn 25 and want all of that to be gone. Not that, it's anything bad, it's just how we represent ourselves online. And so I think that that's kind of like a very modern problem, that we think that all these systems are doing things in the background, and sometimes they're not. But thank you everybody for coming and listening to me and Greg share his story. But we've got our email up there. My email is emma@backlog-archivist.com. If you've got any more questions or want me to pass something along to Greg is here with Backlog as a systems administrator. So if you work on an Omeka with us, he's kind of your guy. So have a good evening.
Okay. Thank you.